All right, so welcome back. We are going to talk about some other water protection acts. One of them being, oh, I don't know why I added this, but I want to go to slideshow. That's what I want to go to. The Oil Pollution Act of 1990. So this was prompted by a big oil spill in 1989 of the Exxon Valdez oil tanker. And I'll talk about it a little bit at the end of the class, but it was like the guy driving this oil tanker was actually like drunk and it was a terrible spill. And it was really very, very harmful to the environment. So, this Oil Pollution Act, which was passed in 1990, streamlined and strengthened the EPA's ability to either prevent something like this from happening again, or if God forbid it happens again, to see it, to address what we have to do. So, under the Oil Pollution Act, if there is an oil spill, like an ocean oil spill, the federal government is in charge. Um, there is now kind of like a CERCLA, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. There's a trust fund that the tax we pay on oil and gas partially funds this. So there's a trust fund if there is a spill that the government can get to and get the spill cleaned up until either you can figure out who the responsible party is, or if they don't have enough money to do it, or somehow they're unwilling and we have to force them to do that later. The Oil Pollution Act requires oil storage facilities, so that would be like any place where the oil is stored, and vessels, so that's your tankers and trucks and anything where oil is. They have to submit to the government plans detailing what they will do in the event of large discharges or spills. There's specific requirements for oil tankers. There is there are new piloting standards for the oil tankers. That was the big thing with the Exxon Valdez. The pilot was under the influence, which contributed to the big spill of oil. Um, you need to create contingency plans by area to prepare and plan for any response to an oil spill regionally. And then it is what we call a strict liability statute. So just because you are transporting or in the business of refining or drilling oil, that is kind of considered an inherently dangerous activity. So you don't have to prove negligence. You just have to prove that there was a spill for there to be liability. Um, and then how in order for an agency to act, they have to have authority from a statute. So the Oil Pollution Act gives the authority to the EPA to regulate above ground storage facilities. And then for the oil tankers, the Coast Guard has now the power to to regulate the oil tankers. So this is, and hopefully this one, what did I do? Okay, there it is. Um, I don't know if you guys saw the movie The Deepwater Horizon with Mark Wahlberg, but that was a terrible fire on an oil rig out in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is kind of an example of using the Oil Pollution Act to get money from BP to help pay for the cleanup. So they got $20.8 billion from BP to pay for that. So you can look at that at your own time. So that's the Oil Pollution Act in action. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about, and this I think is really important and vital to all of us, is the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974. So this is kind of the first sweeping litigation on federal controls on the water used in municipal water systems, so our everyday public drinking water. Um, so we want to make sure that this water in our public water systems is safe to drink. So the SDWA kind of divvies up the responsibility between the EPA, individual states, if we're on tribal land, the tribes, the water systems itself, and the public. So what the EPA does generally in this act is they set standards for drinking water, and based on scientific information as to what is, what is not dangerous to people. And then they talk about, they also balance the technologies available to treat water and the costs involved in treating the water. And then their drinking water, they set these enforceable maximum contaminant levels. So say you talk about lead, and they say what's the maximum amount of lead that can be in drinking water for it to be safe. And if you exceed that, you have to find another water source, or you have to find a treatment to remove the contaminants. The standards also include requirements. It's either the state or the water system that they have to periodically test the water for contaminants to make sure that they are fulfilling these standards. Okay, so EPA sets these national standards for our drinking water. They set what we call a health goal based on risk, and even that includes risks to the more sensitive people. And then based on this goal, they set the legal limit for the contaminant, and we use lead as an example, or a required treatment technique. I don't know what gets rid of lead, or say it's E. coli, and they have to add some sort of antibacterial treatment so that we don't get E. coli in our water. So this treatment, either this limit, either the number limit, the maximum contaminant level, or the treatment technique is set to meet this health goal as much as it is feasible. Okay, so there's different kinds of standards. The primary standards, it seems kind of important. Those relate to contaminants that could adversely affect people's health. So again, lead, something like E. coli, other maybe like mercury or other kinds of heavy metals that would be pretty dangerous. Then there are secondary standards, which I guess are not as important, but those are for contaminants that affect the appearance or odor of water. And so that would be, like, does it look rusty? Does it smell? I know if you guys ever have lived or visited someone who has well water, there is like that, like rotten egg smell sometimes in the water. The act defines a contaminant as a physical, chemical, biological, or radiological substance of matter or matter in the water. Okay, so based on their research for health-based, they establish what we call a recommended maximum contaminant level. So they're like, this is this is what we really want. And the final EPA standard would either be this maximum contaminant level, or they have to have this required treatment technique, probably a combination of filtration and maybe additives to clean the water. So what the SDWA does is it allows the states to control their own drinking water. So they can apply to the EPA for what we call primacy, the authority to implement the Safe Drinking Water Act within their jurisdictions. And they can become, masters of their own water supply if they adopt standards at least as stringent as the EPA standards. And most states have received primacy. I think maybe Wyoming and the District of Columbia have not. So then the EPA will be monitoring their water systems. So these state drinking water programs, they make sure that they test the water systems, these like, the water board, they test their water supply for contaminants. They review any plans for improvements to the water systems. They conduct inspections on site, and they do sanitary surveys. They train, and any water systems not meeting standards, they take action. Okay, so in 1986, a bunch of amendments to the safe, and isn't it the S? Yeah, it's the SDWA, not the SWDA. DA, Safe Drinking Water Act. Poop. I'm going to change that right now because I'm going to forget. SDWA were amended, and the reason it's pretty quick. Well, I mean it's 12 years, but they have these amendments because these final standards, EPA was kind of dragging their heels to set these final standards, and they thought that this act had no flexibility, and some of the poorer water districts didn't have enough resources to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act. So now the Safe Drinking Water Act applies to what we call public drinking water systems that have at least 15 service connections or services to at least 25 people. So if I am living on a farm and I just drink my own well water, the Safe Drinking Water Act does not apply to me. Or if I have a well or that I, use for my livestock, and a couple of other farmers share that with me, then that doesn't apply either. Okay, so rather than having this recommended maximum contaminant level, they changed that to the maximum contaminant level goal, MCLG. And this level is, at that level, there's no known or anticipated adverse effect on the health of the persons drinking it. And for each known contaminant, the EPA sets the limit. So again, lead, E. coli, mercury, whatever it is. But there are no, if they find carcinogens, then that water is not allowed to be drinking water. Okay, so they added this contaminant monitoring and selection. So they kind of have to, maybe we don't know about a new contaminant until we know about it. So we have to kind of continually monitor this. So now microbial, right? On the microbe level, that contamination protection is strengthened. And I think that's like your E. coli stuff. And for any new standard that they come up with, EPA has to conduct a cost benefit analysis before they come up with any new standard. So in the beginning, I said the community is part of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so the water systems, they have to prepare and distribute annual reports and make them available to the population so that everybody can know what they're drinking. They work on prevention of contamination, development of the capacity of the water systems. For smaller systems, remember, one of the problems was that some of these smaller water systems couldn't comply with all the requirements. There are variances and exemptions for these smaller systems. Plus, there's also a revolving fund for things like, small system water systems, infrastructure improvement, and protecting the drinking water sources. Something that was in the news, I actually just saw it on Good Morning America today, but that I think was it Newark? Yeah, Newark, New Jersey is just about to complete replacing all of their old lead pipe drinking water pipes. And they did it in record time. So they started, they anticipated it was going to take 10 years from 2017 or 2018 when they started. And now what are we, 2017 to 2022. That's probably less than 5 years. And they're just about done. And I think this week or next week, Kamala Harris is going to meet with the mayor of Newark and have a little PR gig about, the infrastructure bill and how they're encouraging cities to do things like update their drinking water pipes to give people safe drinking water. Okay, so any water systems operators, so you guys, whatever your water bill is, that's your water system, and those operators must be certified. More public information guidelines where they have a safe drinking water hotline, and there's information on the EPA website about the quality of your drinking water. Yeah, see, there's your small water systems are given assistance to achieve the standards, and states must also assess the sources of the drinking water. Okay, so once our maximum contaminant level goal is set, this is kind of my standards thing, then the EPA sets this maximum contaminant level, which has to be as close as feasible to the goal. Okay, feasibility is your best technology or treatment techniques to make, to filter out your water. And then EPA has to do testing and this risk-based analysis to determine this maximum contaminant level. And if a system like one of these smaller systems can't meet it, then a variance may be allowed or some sort of exemption, but only up to about 3 years as long as there's no danger to the health of the user. And there are strong enforcement provisions for the Safe Drinking Water Act. So that's, the Safe Drinking Water Act is, we'll talk about it in a second, but that there was a big fail with that in what happened in Flint, Michigan. More recently, 2002, Bioterrorism Act. So our country realized that our water supplies may be at risk for terrorist acts. So the to prevent this from happening or to guard against it, the water systems and the EPA must work together to assess the vulnerabilities and plan and practice for emergencies and come up with some security technologies, which it's a scary world we live in. Okay, here's this Safe Drinking Water Act fail. This is just a little article about what happened in Flint. And so what did happen in Flint was that it was state run. So Flint was getting Lake Michigan water. And as a cost cutting, Lake Huron, excuse me, Great Lakes water, we'll call it. Okay, so as a cost cutting measure, they changed it to the Flint River, which, I don't know why you would ever think that was a great idea, because Flint, all of the manufacturing in that area. So they went to that. So then after they switched it, the people who lived there were like, this water smells kind of bad and tastes kind of bad. So what happened because of this, they started adding chlorine to the water to clean it up, make it taste better and make it look better. So what the chlorine did is it eroded the lining of these old lead pipes, and then lead started leaching into the drinking water. So this is the new pipeline in 2012. And the state, so this is a state issue. They authorized Flint to make the switch. It happened in 2014. Okay, then there was fecal bacterium, boil water, and then here, they boost the amount of chlorine in the water and flush the system. Then more of that, then there's more chlorine. And then what happens is after all of these flushes, the iron, the chlorine was corroding the engine parts and corroding these linings of these lead pipes. And then there was, lead going into the water. So, the thing that's interesting here it is, June 24, 2015. So remember, this is a state-run system. But in 2015, one of the residents writes a letter to the EPA saying, like, there's something wrong with our drinking water. And they tested it. The EPA tested it and found high lead levels. And they the state never did anything about it, and the EPA never did anything about it. So that was leaked to the press. So pretty bad. So it's a fail of the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's a fail of the state-run uh, enforcement and EPA oversight, and just like a terrible result. So again, that's something that hopefully, with our infrastructure coming and people changing out, cities changing out lead pipes, something like that won't happen again. So the Exxon Valdez oil spill, that was in 1989 in Alaska. And this guy, this drunk oil tanker pilot collided with a reef, like an underwater reef. And look at that, 11 million gallons of oil spilled into Prince William Sound. So, like, absolutely terrible. Oh, and then this is just interesting to me. I don't know if you guys have ever gone down to, the Gulf of Mexico area in Florida, but sometimes here they have what's called red tide. So red tide, sometimes it's not red, but it's like you go there after there's a red tide or during it. It's just like there's like just kind of red bacteria in the water, and it kills everything, and it kills fish, and you can't really swim in it. See, look at all these poor little fish. Um, so the cause of this is so like the Everglades, right? The swamps in the Everglades like do a filtration process, to before the water goes into the Gulf. But then, you know, Domino's, what is it? Domino's Sugar has filled in some of these Everglades for their sugar plantations. And now what's coming from rather than, flowing through the Everglades and being filtered through these swamps, runoff of fertilizer and all of this stuff is going into the lake and heading down to the Gulf. You see, like there's this lake, it goes into this lake Okeechobee, and then that flows into the Gulf of Mexico. And here's the Everglades, which used to be a filtration thing. So environmentalists want Big Sugar to get the land back to the state of Florida so it can flow the way it's supposed to and be naturally filtered through the Everglades. So that is something that, like, I'm looking at, because at some point I'm going to get old enough that I'm going to want to retire to Florida, and don't really want to live in a red tide area. Okay, so that was a lot. There's a lot about water in environmental law. Uh, Reach out if you have questions, and don't forget to do the discussion board and to take your quiz. Have a good one.